A man with no face, yet he knew Poirot's name. Welcome to Mystery Magnifier. I am your host, Phantom. Comment where you're tuning in from. Your thoughts make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. It was, as I have often observed, the smallest caprice of fate that set great wheels turning. Had I not missed the 4:10 from Victoria by the most absurd margin, my shoelace giving way on the stair to the booking office, I should never have found myself in the lounge of the Chislehurst Arms, sipping indifferent tea and grumbling at the universe as it deserves. The lounge, at that hour, was not crowded. A plump dog slept before the fire. Two elderly ladies knitted in a kind of mutual suspicion. Behind the desk, a young woman with a penciled brow and the light of perpetual caution in her eye was adding up columns with ferocity. Outside, November had draped the Kentish countryside in a thin, cold grey. The sort of day when one thinks of roast pheasant and good claret and is offered instead an overdone scone. I was considering, in a spirit both hungry and philosophical, whether to order an egg or merely to endure, when a voice behind me said quietly, "Mon Dieu, Hastings, but you are the picture of injured virtue." I turned with alacrity. There are voices that a man learns to distinguish from all others, as one knows a particular perfume in a crowd. Hercule Poirot stood there, immaculate as always, as if the drabness of the outside world had agreed to spare him. His coat was brushed to the last hair. His boots were polished to a reflective gloss. The tips of his mustaches were waxed to points so precise one felt they might be used to pierce a paper envelope. "Poirot!" I cried. "What on earth?" He raised a hand. No, do not ask me that eternal question. The earth, she moves in mysterious ways, and so does Hercule Poirot. Besides, I might ask you the same. You are not, I think, in the habit of haunting small inns in Kent like a romantic ghost. I explained my misadventure with the train, and he listened with sympathetic gravity, though I caught the faint twinkle in his eye as he glanced down at my rebellious lace. "You see," he said, "even the shoes of my friend conspire against punctuality. Sit, I will join you. I'm here, in fact, on a matter of a little delicacy." He did not elaborate, but signaled for coffee with the air of a man taking command of a battalion. I'd scarcely arranged myself when the door swung open with a gust of wind and something altogether more urgent. A tall man entered. He might have been 45 or 50, though the precise age was blurred by the strain in his face. His clothes were of excellent cut, but disordered. His cravat sat oddly, as though he had not tied it himself. His expression was not simply agitated. There was a kind of hunted astonishment in it, as if a dream had stepped out of the night and placed a hand upon his shoulder. He looked about the room in the swift, searching way of someone who knows what he seeks. His gaze fell first on the knitting ladies, slid past the receptionist, and then stopped short upon Poirot. It was curious, and I confess at once, intriguing, that at the sight of my friend, the man went quite still. He did not smile. He did not relax. Instead, a subtle change came over him, like a man who has found a door and is not sure whether it leads to salvation or a trap. Then, with a little bow that was almost formal, he approached us. "Monsieur Poirot," he said. Poirot's coffee arrived at that moment. He looked up mildly. "But certainly, monsieur. I have that honor, and you have the advantage, for I do not know you." The man's eyes flickered to me and back. "And yet I know you," he said quietly. "Perhaps that is why I've come." Poirot set down his cup with infinite care. There are moments when one sees, like a shutter lifting, the full alertness behind his courteous manner. It is a particular kind of stillness, like a cat listening in a dark room. "You know my name," Poirot murmured. "That is already a detail. One does not find it by accident, eh?" "No accident," said the stranger, "but you must forgive my boldness. I did not know where else to turn. My name is Victor Newland. I'm staying at Ashley Court." At that name, I observed Poirot's eyelids lower slightly. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. "Ah," he said softly. "Ashley Court. So it is there, then, that the trouble has bloomed." Newland caught his breath. "You have heard of it?" "I hear of many things, monsieur." Poirot's tone was polite to the borders of indifference. "But I do not yet hear of your trouble. Sit, I beg. You are cold." The man sat. For a moment he seemed uncertain how to begin, as if he had rehearsed one story and found himself, on arrival, unable to tell it. He placed a hand flat upon his knee. I saw that it trembled. "I'm afraid," he said at last, "that I must ask you to come at once." Poirot looked at him over steepled fingers. "At once is a word that means different things to different mouths. Explain to me why I must abandon my coffee." "Because someone is dead." It was not his words, but his manner that iced the air. He did not say it with melodrama, nor with theatrical sorrow. He said it as one might say that a house had caught fire and the wind was high. Poirot did not move. "Someone at Ashley Court?" "Yes, Sir Alistair Rotham." That name, too, meant something to me. Sir Alistair Rotham was a figure of some local note, old money, a baronetcy, and a reputation for collecting rare artifacts with a zeal bordering on mania. He had been in the society pages that summer, giving a garden fete for some visiting dignitary. I recalled photographs of a handsome stone house with yew hedges clipped to near geometric arrogance. Poirot, however, did not glance at me. His attention remained fixed on the stranger. "And you," he said gently, "you found him?" Newland swallowed. "Not I, the housekeeper, but I was there. I heard the cry, and when I ran—" He stopped, pressed his fingers to his eyes for 1 second, then drew them away as if ashamed of the gesture. "Monsieur Poirot, I know what this will look like. That is why I came. There is no time. You fear you will be suspected." Poirot said it not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact. "Yes. Why?" Newland's gaze darted to the door, like a man expecting his own shadow to follow him in. "Because I had quarreled with him, because I had threatened him, because it concerns something I cannot, something I must not speak of here." Poirot considered. "You do not wish to speak in this public place. That is reasonable. But you will tell me enough to decide whether I should accompany you. Who is dead, how died he, and what it is that you think the police will say." Newland's throat worked. We found him in the library. He had been shot. The pistol was on the carpet near his right hand, as though he had dropped it. The room was locked from within." "A locked room," Poirot murmured. "Yes, and the library window opens onto the terrace, only a few feet down to the gravel. Anyone could have gone out there unnoticed in the dark, but the door—" He spread his hands helplessly. "The key was inside. I broke in through the communicating door from the morning room. There is no other way." Poirot nodded slightly, still expressionless. "And yet you are afraid they will say you did it, because you had a quarrel with him. Concerning what?" Newland hesitated. "His collection, a particular item." "What item?" Poirot's voice was mild, but I knew the iron in it. "The chalice of Saint-Audran." The words meant nothing to me at the time, but as he said them, I noticed something in Poirot's face, a minute tightening as though a thread had been pulled at the edge of a tapestry. "The chalice," Poirot said softly. "So, and is it still there?" Newland's mouth flattened. "No, it is gone." There was a pause. Even the knitting ladies seemed to have stilled their needles, the old dog's ear pricking as if the very syllables had disturbed him. Poirot leaned back. "Let me understand. Sir Alistair Rotham is shot dead. The room is locked from within. A valuable object, the chalice of Saint-Audran, has disappeared. You have quarreled with him about it and fear you will be accused. Is this the essence?" "Yes." Poirot's eyes were very bright. "And why come to me, Monsieur Newland, rather than to the police?" "Because you are Hercule Poirot," Newland said simply, "and because—" He faltered, then made an effort. "Because there is something about this that feels wrong, too neat, too arranged." Poirot's mustaches lifted imperceptibly. "Ah, you feel the hand of the arranger? That is a sentiment I understand. But still, you come to me as to a priest with your confession, and you say you know my name. How?" Newland's gaze met Poirot's, and for the first time I saw in it not fear, but a curious, stony resolve. "Because Sir Alistair knew it too," he said. "He spoke of you yesterday evening. He said you would be the only man to untangle what was about to happen." Poirot's face became unreadable. "Did he now?" he said quietly. "And did he say why?" Newland shook his head. "Only that you dealt once with a matter in Belgium, years ago, when he was a younger man. He called it the affair of the river barges and laughed. I don't know what he meant. But he said your mind was exact, that if danger came to Ashley Court, he would send for you. And he did not send," Poirot murmured half to himself. "Instead, danger came in silence." Newland leaned forward. "Monsieur Poirot, I swear to you I did not kill him, but if you do not come now, I fear the truth will be buried before it is even unearthed. They will seize on the easiest answer. There are people at the court who would prefer that." "People?" I broke in before I could check myself. "Who else was there?" Newland glanced at me, as if only now recognizing that Poirot was not alone. "Forgive me. Captain Hastings, yes? I had not expected to find you." His eyes flickered again, and I thought I detected something like reluctance. "There are several of us staying there. Sir Alistair gathered a small party for the weekend. His niece, Miss Celia Rotham, her fiancé, Mr. Gerald Hart, Lady Lucinda Merrow, an old friend of the family, Dr. Basil Carrington, his private physician, Mrs. Deirdre Pike, the secretary who manages his collection, and Mr. Jonah Vale, an American financier, plus the servants, of course, the housekeeper, Mrs. Ripley, the butler, Saunders, 2 maids, a gardener who sleeps in the lodge. A neatly closed circle," Poirot said mildly. "How very convenient." Newland flinched. "You see? It is like a play in which the stage has already been set." Poirot rose, and in doing so, somehow made even that ordinary inn chair look like a throne relinquished. "Very well, Monsieur Newland," he said. "We will go to Ashley Court, but understand this. I accompany you not because you are innocent, nor because you are guilty, but because the little grey cells find themselves interested, and because Sir Alistair spoke my name as a prophecy. I do not like prophecies." He turned to me. "Hastings, you will come, naturally." "Of course," I said. "Bien." Poirot picked up his hat with a fastidiousness that would have been comic in any other moment. "Let us see, then, what kind of stranger knew my name, and why he arranged that I should be called." We stepped out into the raw November air. The sky hung low and the fields were the color of old pewter. Newland's car waited at the curb, engine running, like a beast eager for flight. As we drove away, I looked back once at the Chislehurst Arms, at its warm windows and the trivial peace I had been so annoyed to endure. It seemed absurdly far already. And somewhere ahead, beyond the grey hedgerows, a house stood locked about its secrets. 1 man dead, 1 relic missing, and a circle of living faces soon to become, each in their turn, suspects in the most delicate and dangerous of games. I confess I felt that old, familiar tightening in the chest, excitement laced with foreboding. For whenever Poirot's eyes light in that peculiar way, one may be sure that beneath the polished surface of ordinary life, something extraordinary and terrible has begun to move. The drive to Ashley Court took no more than 20 minutes, yet in that time the atmosphere inside the car thickened noticeably. Newland drove with a strained precision, hands fixed at 10 and 2 as though he feared the wheel might leap away. Poirot sat beside him, small and composed, his overcoat folded neatly over his knees. I was in the back, looking out at the bare hedges and skeletal trees flashing past like dock ribs against the sky. For a while, none of us spoke. It was Poirot who broke the silence. "Monsieur Newland, you said you quarreled with Sir Alistair yesterday evening. At what hour?" Newland's shoulders tightened, but he answered readily. "After dinner. About 10, perhaps a little after. We were in the library." "Alone?" "No. Miss Rotham was there at first, and Mr. Hart came in later. But the quarrel was between Sir Alistair and myself." "And did you leave the library together?" "No, I left him there. He was angry. He said things he did not mean. I said things too." His voice dipped. I went to my room. Poirot nodded, as if noting the curve of each word. "And at what hour did you retire?" 11. I was certain of it because I looked at my watch as I climbed the stairs. "You did not go out again?" "Not until the cry," Newland said quickly. "Not until just now." Poirot was silent a moment. "We will return to that. It is always good to return." Ashley Court emerged from the last bend with a suddenness that surprised me. It stood somewhat back from the road, a broad, honey-colored mass of old stone with tall chimneys and a rigid discipline of windows. The terrace ran along the front like a pale brow, and beneath it, gravel spread out in a semicircle, already rutted by the wheels of hurried cars. The yew hedges were clipped into severe walls. Even in winter, the place had the air of a man who would not allow nature to go untidy. At the steps, a group of people stood clustered in a kind of uneasy tableau. I distinguished at once a young woman in a dark coat, her face pinched white with shock, a florid gentleman with a quick, bird-like glance, and beyond them a tall, heavy-shouldered man in the uniform of the county police. A constable hovered near the A's door, and I caught a glimpse inside of a maid who had been crying. Newland pulled up sharply, almost too sharply, and led the way. The young woman moved forward. "Victor!" she cried. "Where have you been?" "Oh!" She stopped short as her eyes fell upon Poirot. "Who?" "Celia, this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot," Newland said. His voice held a note of apology, as though he had brought a doctor without permission. "He will help us." The girl, Miss Celia Rotham, stared. She was perhaps 24, with dark hair swept back in a practical twist and eyes that were too large for the pallor of her face. I saw in her expression the flicker of a refuge taken in desperation. "Poirot?" she repeated softly, and her gaze sharpened in a way that did not match her youth. "Uncle mentioned you, only yesterday. I didn't believe you could be real." Poirot bowed with that exact politeness that somehow never seemed to waste a movement. "Mademoiselle is kind. Alas, I am too real when one considers the circumstances." The florid gentleman edged closer. He had a tidy mustache, a thick neck, and the restless air of one long accustomed to being obeyed, but now unsure by what authority. "I'm Inspector Harrowby," he said briskly. "County CID, and you are?" "Hercule Poirot." The inspector blinked. "The Hercule Poirot?" Poirot spread his hands modestly. "They tell me there is only one." Harrowby's eyes traveled rapidly over him, then to Newland and Miss Rotham, and back again. The look on his face was not altogether welcoming, rather the wary irritation of a man whose pond has acquired a swan without his asking. "Well," he said at last, "we're in the middle of matters. But Sir Alistair's death is, as you may imagine, serious. If the family wishes to consult you, very well. But I'm in charge here." "But naturally," said Poirot mildly. "I should not dream of taking your place. I'm here only as a little, how do you say, supplement." Harrowby snorted, half amused, half unconvinced, and jerked his head toward the door. "You'd better come in, then. We've secured the library. No one's been permitted inside since we forced entry, except the doctor. He's still there." We entered a wide hall paneled in dark oak. The air inside was curiously warm, almost close, and smelt faintly of beeswax and dying roses. On a console table, a silver bowl held keys tossed in confusion, an untidy detail I saw Poirot register without looking directly. To the right ran the terrace doors. To the left, a passage led deeper into the house. Harrowby took us that way. As we passed the foot of the stairs, I saw a man standing there with his arms folded, watching. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with fair hair slicked back and a face that would have been handsome had it not carried a perpetual little sneer at the corner of the mouth. His eyes were bloodshot. Whether from grief or drink I could not, at once, decide. "Gerald?" Miss Rotham murmured. He did not move. "So you fetched a celebrity," he said in a low voice that was quite without softness. How very theatrical. Poirot turned to him pleasantly. "Monsieur must forgive me. I do not come for the theatre. I come for the truth. That is less entertaining." The man's lips twitched. "We shall see." We moved on, and Miss Rotham did not look back. At the library door we found another figure, tall and spare in a dark suit, with a severe mustache and hair that had retreated from his forehead as if in intellectual humility. He held a small leather case and wore the expression of a man who has seen too much mortality to be easily surprised. "Dr. Carrington," Harrowby said, "this is Monsieur Poirot." The doctor inclined his head. "I know the name," he said quietly. "Sir Alister spoke of you, more than once." Poirot's brows lifted ever so slightly. "Ah, then it is indeed true that I have been expected." Carrington's gaze was steady. Expected or feared, I couldn't say which. Before Poirot could reply, Harrowby produced a key from his pocket. "This is the morning room key. We forced it earlier. The library door itself was locked from inside when the housekeeper found the body." He opened the door and stood aside. The library was a long, handsome room, lined with books that rose to the cornice and smelled of old leather. A marble fireplace with a low fire sat opposite tall French windows that looked onto the terrace. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a grey, wintry light. The shock of violence in such a place was almost indecent. Sir Alister Rotham lay on his back before the hearth. He was a big man, the sort that had once been broad-shouldered and powerful, now thick with age but still impressive even in death. His head was turned slightly to the left. His mouth sagged open in a way that told of suddenness. There was a dark bloom on his chest where the bullet had entered and another stain along his right cuff. A small pistol lay near his hand, not quite in line with it. Poirot did not approach at once. He stood on the threshold, motionless, letting his eyes travel over the whole scene as if absorbing a painting. Then he stepped in, softly, almost reverently, and I felt that peculiar change in the air that always came when Poirot's little grey cells began to sort, to weigh, and to judge. "Tell me," he said at last, "exactly how he was found." Inspector Harrowby cleared his throat, casting a quick glance at the doctor as though to confirm that he had already rehearsed the essentials. "Mrs. Ripley, the housekeeper, went in just after 8 this morning to draw the curtains," he said. "Sir Alister wasn't down for breakfast by then, which is unusual, so she thought he'd slept late. The curtains were still closed. She called to him. No answer. She saw him lying there. The door was locked. She raised the alarm. We found the key on the inside of the door, the morning room door to the right there." He indicated a smaller communicating door half hidden behind a screen of books. "Was unlocked. We forced that and entered." Poirot went to the communicating door first. He examined the lock, the splintered wood at the edge where a shoulder had broken it. "You broke in with violence, Inspector?" "A constable. Mrs. Ripley was in hysterics." Poirot nodded. He crossed to the main door and knelt, not to the keyhole itself, but to the brass key lying on the carpet near the threshold. He did not touch it. He merely looked. Then he rose and glanced at the terrace windows. The French windows. Were they fastened? Bolted, Harrowby replied. Not from the outside, mind you. But we checked. No sign of tampering. What of the terrace itself? Poirot asked. Gravel showed no clear prints. It rained after midnight. Everything's a mush out there. Poirot did not ask further. Instead, he approached the body. Dr. Carrington hovered, professional and watchful. He has been dead how long, Doctor? Poirot asked. Since about midnight, perhaps a little after. The wound is close range. Heart shock. Death would have been almost immediate. Poirot's eyes traveled to the pistol. You say close range. Did you examine the weapon? Carrington nodded. A small automatic. Sir Alistair kept it in a drawer, I understand. One shot fired. The rest full. Poirot crouched now, his head tilted slightly, not unlike a bird listening for a worm. He studied the dead man's hands, the right cuff stained dark. Blood on the sleeve, he murmured. Not much. He was upright when shot. Likely in his chair, Harrowby said, pointing to a high-backed armchair angled toward the fire. We suppose he was reading, shot himself. Door locked, key inside, chalice taken earlier. A guilty man, a sudden conscience, and a dramatic end. Poirot's gaze flicked to the armchair and then to the carpet between it and the body. You suppose he shot himself from that chair as he sat? That's the simplest, Harrowby said with growing impatience. No one else could get in. That's what locked doors are for. Poirot did not dispute. He walked to the chair, still without touching anything. He looked at its right arm, at the small side table beside it, where a book lay face down, a collapsed pair of spectacles on top like broken wings. A man who shoots himself, Poirot said softly. He usually makes arrangements. A letter, perhaps. Some word prepared for the living. Have you found any? Nothing so far. We haven't done a full search yet. And the chalice, when was it last seen? Mrs. Ripley had drifted to the open doorway at that moment, a large woman with a red, blotched face and an apron clutched in her hand, as if it were a lifeline. She spoke before Harrowby could answer. Last night, sir, after dinner, Sir Alistair showed it to the guests like he loved to do. He was fair, bursting with pride over it. Said it was to be locked away again after. Mr. Newland was with him, and so was Miss Pike. I saw them. They went in here. He never let that chalice pass out of his sight till he locked it in the cabinet. Which cabinet? Poirot asked. She pointed with a trembling finger to a glass-fronted case at the far end. Its door stood open. Inside, on a velvet stand, a hollow space gaped. Poirot approached the case. His face remained calm, yet I saw in the tightening of his mouth that he was not so easily persuaded by Harrowby's tidy tale. And you are sure he locked it in? As sure as I can be. I heard the key turn. Poirot looked at her gently. You heard, but you did not see. No, sir. I was clearing in the dining room, but he always did the same. He'd even send Saunders away. Nobody was to touch his treasures. Not a soul. Poirot thanked her with a little bow. She dabbed her eyes and retreated. Poirot returned to the center of the room. His gaze now took in the floor around the body. The rug rumpled a fraction, a little scuff where a heavy heel might have dragged. He walked a slow semicircle, and I noticed his eyes pause at a small object near the skirting board, a thin, pale scrap, no bigger than a postage stamp. He did not pick it up. He only noted it as a man might note a pebble on a road he will later require. At last, he turned to Inspector Harrowby. You say suicide because the room was locked. But tell me, Inspector, what happens when a room is locked from within? Harrowby stared. It means no one could have left. Precisely, but it does not always mean no one entered. The inspector bristled. If you've a theory, say it. Poirot smiled disarmingly. We will not leap to theories yet. We will first be exact. That is the difference between the police and Poirot. Do not be offended, I beg. We will speak to the people. Then perhaps the locked door will become less proud of itself. Harrowby made a noise that might have been assent or annoyance. Fine, I'm interviewing them anyway. If you want to sit in, you may, but don't hamper my men. You will find me most unhampering, Poirot said serenely. We went out into the morning room, which seemed suddenly too bright, too ordinary after the solemn shadow of the library. A tray of untouched coffee stood on a side table. Someone had poured. No one had drunk. Human nature seldom pauses its small rituals, even before death. Miss Celia Rotham was in the window seat, her hands knotted in her lap. Gerald Hart stood with his back to the fire, still wearing that brittle, superior air. Near the piano, a woman in a maroon dress sat stiffly, her hair silvered and her face so carefully composed that you could see the effort of it. She was Lady Lucinda Merrow. At the writing desk, a younger woman, pale and angular, arranged papers into a neat stack with movements that were almost automatic. Deirdre Pike, the secretary. And by the bookcase, leaning with a loose-limbed grace, was an American I took at once for Jonah Vale. Tanned, smiling faintly, eyes too awake for so somnolent a posture. Inspector Harrowby drew out his notebook. "Same questions for all of you," he said. "Where were you between 11 last night and 8 this morning? What did you hear? What did you see?" Poirot did not sit. He hovered slightly behind and to the side, as a polite guest might. Yet even without speaking, he seemed to alter the room. People answered Harrowby, but their eyes slid to Poirot as if by magnet. Miss Rotham went first. Her voice was steady, but each word looked hard-won. "I left Uncle in the library at about 10:30. He was with Miss Pike and Victor. Mr. Newland, I mean. They were discussing the chalice. I did not like their tone, so I excused myself. I went upstairs and read. I heard nothing in the night. I slept badly. I came down at 8. When Uncle did not appear, Mrs. Ripley went to check." Harrowby scribbled. "You didn't go down again?" "No." Poirot spoke mildly. "Mademoiselle, you say you did not like their tone. Why?" She flushed faintly. "Because Uncle was angry. Victor wanted him to lend the chalice for an exhibition. Uncle refused. Victor pressed. Uncle said cruel things. I asked him to stop. He would not. And the chalice is of great value? Yes, not merely money. It was, his pride." Gerald Hart gave a sharp laugh. "Pride and obsession. There's a difference, and my future father-in-law never learned it." Miss Rotham shot him a look, wounded and warning. Harrowby turned on him. "Your movements, Mr. Hart." "I went to bed around 12. I was in my room all night. I heard nothing. Like Celia says, Alistair kept odd hours. If he wanted to sit in that library till dawn, that was his affair." Poirot's voice was gentle. "At what hour, monsieur, did you last see Sir Alistair alive?" Hart's jaw tightened. "About 10:45. I went in to fetch a book. He was with Newland and Pike. He told me to leave him to his business. I did." A little emphasis on the "did" struck me. Poirot seemed to hear it too, for his head inclined a fraction. Lady Lucinda spoke next. She listed her night in calm, almost lucid phrases. A headache after dinner, early retirement, no waking until a maid knocked to say there had been an accident. Her tone was impeccable. Her hands, however, worried the edge of her handkerchief in tiny, careful folds. Miss Pike's statement was brisk, almost rehearsed. She had left Sir Alistair shortly before 11, after putting the chalice away in the case. She had gone to her room to draft letters. She claimed to have worked until 1. She heard nothing. She slept thereafter. Jonah Vale smiled throughout his account, but it was not a cheerful smile. Rather the expression of a man used to storms and curious which way the wind will blow. Sir Alistair and I played a hand of backgammon. He nodded to the small board on a side table. Ended about 9:30. He was in high spirits, speaking of his Audran treasure like a boy with Christmas. I went to my room around 10, read a bit, lights out by 11, slept solid. I'm a heavy sleeper, Inspector. You could set off a cannon and I'd dream of parades. Poirot's eyes rested on him thoughtfully, though he said nothing. The interviews ended. Harrowby shut his notebook with a snap. Right, all alibis as neat as a barber's shop, and still a dead man in a locked room. We'll do a formal search, take fingerprints, send for the yard dogs. Meanwhile, nobody leaves the house. Poirot murmured agreement. Yet as Harrowby moved toward the door, my friend turned suddenly to Miss Rotham. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "when your uncle showed you the chalice last night, did he say anything unusual? Anything, how shall I put it, prophetic?" She hesitated, then nodded very slightly. "He said," she whispered, "that sometimes the past comes to claim its own, and that if anything happened to him, we were to trust the little grey cells of Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's face did not change, but I felt very distinctly that the game had deepened. Poirot received the girl's whisper without flourish, merely inclining his head as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. Yet when he turned away from her, I caught a glint in his eye that was almost impatient. He dislikes, I have learned, being used as a charm against evil. He prefers to be consulted as a mind. Inspector Harrowby's men began to move about the house. Doors opened, servants were questioned in low voices, and somewhere upstairs a drawer was pulled out and shut again with a crisp, offended sound. The air of Ashley Court filled with that peculiar, muffled bustle that follows upon disaster. People walking quickly but trying not to seem to hurry. Poirot drifted, as if by chance, toward the tray of coffee. He poured himself a cup, tasted it, and made a tiny face. Then, cup in hand, he crossed to the terrace doors and stood looking out. Rain had indeed passed in the night. The gravel beyond the windows was damp and pocked, the border beds dark with wet earth. The river of hedges along the drive glistened faintly. A gardener in a thick coat moved at the far end, raking in a slow, preoccupied way, pausing now and then as though he listened for instructions that did not come. "Inspector tells me there are no footprints," Poirot said without turning. "No clear ones," I replied. "The rain washes many things, yes, but it does not wash everything." He pointed with his spoon. "See there." At first I saw nothing. Then, following the line of his arm, I noticed a faint disturbance near the terrace steps. The gravel had been turned over in a small crescent, not like a footprint, but like the skid of a heel. Beside it, a narrow runnel of mud had dried on the lowest stone, as if a wet shoe had paused there before stepping inside. "It could be any servant," I said doubtfully. "Could be. That is why we do not decide yet." Poirot set his cup down on a side table, carefully away from the edge. "Come, Hastings. We will see the library again. I wish to be alone with my thoughts for a little." We returned to the corridor. A constable stood at the library door now, but stepped aside at Harrowby's brusque order. The inspector himself was in the hall speaking to Saunders the butler, and waved impatiently when Poirot nodded to him. Inside, the library had already begun to lose some of its first starkness. The doctor's presence earlier, Harrowby's entry, the murmured talk at the threshold. These had disturbed the stillness of death. Yet the body had not been moved. It lay there, stubbornly accusing. Poirot closed the door behind us. "Now," he said softly, "we will look with the eyes and with the little grey cells. Not with the eyes only, like the honest inspector." He went straight to the armchair by the fire. This time he did touch, but with delicacy, as if asking permission. He lifted the book that lay face down on the side table, glanced at its title, The Life of Saint Audran, and replaced it precisely in the same position. "A pious choice," he murmured, "or a theatrical one." He picked up the spectacles, examined a lens for a smear, and put them back. Then he crouched by the chair, running his fingers along the right arm. "Ah," he said, "what is it?" He did not answer at once. Instead, he rose and moved to the carpet between the chair and the body, measuring with his eyes the distance. If he shot himself seated there, Poirot said, he would fall in a certain way. Men are heavy. They do not fall like feathers. They collapse where they are. Yet look, he is 2 good paces from the chair, and his head is toward the hearth. That is not the natural tumble of a man whose heart stops at once. Perhaps he staggered, I suggested. A last instinct. Poirot made a tiny noise. Staggered where? His heart would be pierced. He would not essay the dance. Unless, he paused, head tilted. Unless he was not seated there. You mean he was standing? Possibly, or possibly he was placed. We shall see. He crossed to the skirting board where I'd earlier seen his attention linger. He knelt and picked up delicately the pale scrap I had noticed. It was not paper, as I had thought, but a sliver of white wax, slightly curved, with a faint ridge upon one side. Poirot held it between finger and thumb. Wax, he said simply, with a groove, like from a candle. But no candle burned here last night except the fire. There are no candles about, I said. No. He slipped the wax into an envelope from his pocket and marked something on it with his pencil. So, we must ask, how did a piece of candle wax come to be here, and why in such a place, right by the door? He rose and approached the main door. He studied the keyhole once more, then the threshold. He walked to the glass case where the chalice had stood and examined the velvet stand, the open door, the lock. This lock, he murmured, is not forced. It is opened with a key. Sir Alistair turned it, yes, but perhaps not the last to do so. He moved to the French windows now. The bolts were indeed fastened. He touched the lower rail, then the curtain cord, and again he made that soft sound of satisfaction, like a man hearing an internal note fall into harmony. Hastings, you observe? I observe a great deal, but nothing that tells me who killed him. Poirot smiled faintly. That is because you look for the killer on the outside. But we are not there yet. He returned to the pistol. Without touching it, he examined its position relative to the hand. It lies as if dropped, I said. Yes, Poirot replied, as if placed to seem dropped. I stared, and he went on quietly. Look at the right hand. The fingers are not curled. In a true shot suicide, the hand often contracts around the weapon at the shock. Not always, but often. And also, see the stain along this cuff. It is not sprayed. It is wiped, a smear, as though someone held his arm after the shot or moved him by it. The blood on his chest has soaked downward in a certain direction. If he were standing, it would fall one way. If seated, another. We will ask the doctor again, perhaps. But already I say to myself, there is arrangement here. He walked once more around the body, then stopped abruptly, eyes fixed on the floor near the hearth. I followed his gaze and saw a tiny black bead no wider than a lentil. One may have taken it for a bit of coal. Poirot bent and lifted it. Not coal, he said. A button. From a lady's glove, perhaps, or a man's cuff. See the shank broken. How could that matter? It might have fallen any time. Poirot's eyes were very kind as they met mine. It might, but in a house where order is worshipped, little things do not fall without being noticed. Sir Alistair had an obsession with neatness. Mrs. Ripley said so. He would not tolerate litter in his temple. Therefore, this button is young. It fell during disturbance. He tucked it away beside the wax. A knock sounded at the door. Before I could answer, Harrowby entered, his face impatient, cheeks a little red from the cold. Sorry to intrude, he said, but I thought you might want to know. We've found something in Sir Alistair's writing desk. A letter, half written. Looks like he was about to send for you, Poirot. Poirot took the sheet. His eyes scanned it rapidly. He did not read aloud, but I saw the address at the top. Hercule Poirot, Whitehaven Mansions, London, and the first line. My dear Monsieur Poirot, the past has come knocking at my door. Poirot's face did not change, yet his hand tightened on the page. And also, Harrowby went on, we've got a new wrinkle. The American, Vale, says his car keys are missing. He swears he left them on the hall table last night. Means someone's been poking about down there after midnight. Poirot folded the letter carefully. Interesting. Interesting or inconvenient, Harrowby snapped. I'm trying to keep this simple. Locked room, missing relic, suspect with motive. Newland's got the strongest quarrel with him, and the relic was the subject. We found Newland pacing the terrace at dawn, too. A maid saw him. Newland pacing at dawn. I turned instinctively toward Poirot, but he was already contemplating the inspector with mild, almost affectionate reproach. You are a little too much in love with simplicity, Inspector, he said gently. And love, as I have often remarked, makes one blind. Harrowby frowned. You suggesting Newland didn't do it? I'm suggesting nothing yet, only that facts are like people. They do not like to be pushed into a corner before they have spoken. Right, well, I'm questioning Newland formally in half an hour. You can attend if you want. Meanwhile, no one steps a foot off this estate, and if your little grey cells get a revelation, kindly share it. Poirot inclined his head. If they get a revelation, Inspector, they will share it at the proper moment. Revelations, like soufflé, do not like rough handling. Harrowby stared, then went out muttering something about foreigners. When the door closed, Poirot stood for a moment quite still. Then he said softly, not to me, but to the dead man on the rug. So, my friend, you were writing to me, and before the ink dried, you were silenced. That is not an accident. That is fear. He turned to me. Hastings, we go to Monsieur Newland now. I wish to see his face when he speaks of dawn. We found Victor Newland in the small smoking room that looked out over the rear lawns. He had chosen a seat by the window as though the act of sitting anywhere else might make him feel trapped. A cigarette burned between his fingers without his seeming to notice it. Ash had formed a long grey stalk that trembled with each small movement of his hand. Inspector Harrowby was already there, his notebook open, his manner brusque in that way officialdom adopts when it wishes to look impartial while knowing quite well where its suspicions lie. A constable hovered by the door. Newland rose as we entered. His eyes went first to Poirot, then quickly away. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. Poirot nodded pleasantly. Monsieur Newland, you are calm now? Newland gave a short laugh. I don't think I've ever been less calm in my life. Then that is a kind of calm also, Poirot replied. He took a chair opposite. Inspector permits that I listen. I will remain silent unless I have a small question. Harrowby grunted and began without preamble. Name, age, occupation. Newland answered. Victor Newland, 46, curator for the St. Audran Foundation. We arrange ecclesiastical exhibitions, loan agreements, restoration, that sort of thing. You were at Ashley Court by invitation. Yes. Sir Alistair invited me for the weekend to discuss a loan. Loan of the chalice? Yes. Tell me about last night. Harrowby nodded to his pen. From after dinner. Newland took a breath. Dinner finished about 9. Sir Alistair was cheerful then. He offered everyone port and asked if we would like to see the chalice. We went to the library. He unlocked the cabinet and displayed it. He talked about its provenance. He always did. Lady Lucinda and Mr. Vale looked on. Celia excused herself early. She was upset by the argument that started between Sir Alistair and me. Harrowby leaned forward. Argument about what? About the loan. The Foundation has arranged an exhibition in Dublin. The chalice would be central. I still believe it should be seen, not hidden away in a private case. Sir Alistair refused. He said the chalice was safer here. I pressed him. He took it as an insult. You threatened him. Newland's jaw tightened. In anger, yes. I told him the Foundation could go public about his refusal, that the church would not be pleased. It was deplorable of me, Inspector, but it is the truth. Poirot spoke softly. What words did Sir Alister use to you? Newland's eyes flicked up. He said I was not who I claimed to be. He said I had a face from the past. I did not understand. I thought he was merely trying to wound me. Poirot's hands came together gently. Ah. Harrowby tapped his pen. And after this you left? Yes. I looked at my watch in the hall. It was just after 11. I went to my room. I stayed there. You didn't go down again during the night? No. Harrowby's gaze sharpened. A maid says she saw you on the terrace at dawn, about 6. Newland went still. The cigarette ash dropped in a neat little line onto his cuff, and he brushed it away with an almost automatic movement. I was on the terrace, he said quietly. Yes. You told us earlier you didn't leave your room until the alarm. I meant until the alarm in the house, Newland said quickly. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't sleep. I went out for air. At 6 in the morning. At about 5:30, perhaps. I woke early. I'd been restless all night. And you went through the library window? No, through the hall. The terrace doors were unlatched. I walked out. Poirot's voice was mild. You walked on the terrace while it was still wet with rain? Newland hesitated a second too long. Yes, it was damp, but not terrible. And you returned by the same way? Yes. Poirot inclined his head and said no more. Harrowby's tone sharpened further. What were you doing pacing about like a guilty man? Newland looked up, and for the first time since I had met him, there came into his face a flash of something like anger. Like a guilty man? I was thinking of what I had said to him. I was thinking I might go in at breakfast and apologize. If that makes me guilty, Inspector, then I suppose every man who regrets a quarrel is guilty. It makes you the man with motive and opportunity, Harrowby said flatly. You knew he kept a pistol. You knew the chalice was in that cabinet. You were with him last night when he put it away. Then by morning he's dead and it's gone. The door locked from inside. You're seen walking the terrace at dawn, conveniently after the rain smudges whatever prints you might have left earlier. And you come roaring off to fetch Poirot before you even tell me the truth about your own movements. Newland's hands clenched. If you think I killed him, why am I here? Why didn't I drive on, disappear, take the chalice and vanish? And why did you not? Poirot asked quietly. Newland stared at him. Because I don't have it. Because I didn't kill him. Because the chalice is not a thing you can sell like stolen jewelry. It is known. It is watched. Whoever took it did not do so for money alone. Poirot's eyes were very intent. For what alone, then? Newland swallowed. For confession. For vengeance. For some twisted idea of restoring what was lost. He shook his head, as though the words themselves tasted strange. Monsieur Poirot, I swear to you there is something about that chalice. Something Sir Alister hinted. Something I've spent years trying to verify. It is not merely old metal. It carries a story. A scandal, perhaps. Harrowby snorted. Scandal doesn't shoot a man. No, Newland said bleakly, but men shoot each other over scandal every day. Poirot was silent. I felt his mind moving, clicking into place. He turned his head slightly. Monsieur Newland, you say Sir Alister told you you were not who you claimed to be, that you had a face from the past. Do you know what he meant? Newland's eyes fell. I don't. And yet, last night after I left him, I couldn't rid myself of the feeling that he did know something about me, that he had been expecting an enemy and saw him where he pleased. Poirot nodded slowly. You did not speak to him again after you left? No, not even to apologize. Newland gave a bitter smile. If I had, perhaps he would be alive. But I was proud. I went to bed thinking he was the unreasonable one. It is a small comfort now. Harrowby shut his notebook with a snap like a mousetrap. You'll be staying on the premises. That's all for now." Newland rose, his face drawn. He looked at Poirot as if he wanted to say something and dared not. Then he went out under the constable's watch. When the door had closed behind him, Harrowby let out a weary breath. "Well, he's slippery, but he's our man. I'll have the yard boys on the Chalice angle and the weapon for Prince. Either he shot him and staged a suicide, or there's an accomplice." Poirot regarded him with gentle fondness. "You are a good hunter, Inspector. But sometimes the fox sits in the middle of the road and lets you chase your own shadow." Harrowby's eyes narrowed. "You think he's not the fox?" "I think he is hunting something too," Poirot said softly. "That is not the same thing." Harrowby made a dismissive motion. "All right, I've still to speak to Saunders again and the maid who saw him, and I want a proper search of all the rooms. If anyone's hiding a medieval cup in this house, we'll find it." Poirot bowed slightly. "And I, meanwhile, will do what you do not do. I will watch the faces." The inspector muttered and went out. Left alone, I said what was in my mind. "Poirot, surely Newland's story about Dawn is suspicious. He lied once already." Poirot gave me a sideways look. "He lied to protect himself from appearance, Hastings, not to hide a deed. There is a difference. His lie is clumsy. A clumsy lie often comes from fear, not craft." "But you don't believe he took the chalice?" Poirot's face grew thoughtful. "He may have wished to, but wishing is not doing, and besides, if he had it, he would not speak of it with that peculiar mixture of reverence and dread. Men do not describe their loot as a relic they cannot sell." He crossed to the window. Outside, the damp lawns shone in a pale winter light. A magpie hopped with insolent leisure along the hedge line. Farther off, by the terrace steps, I saw the maid who had made the report speaking to another constable, hands fluttering like startled birds. Poirot watched her for a long moment. "Come, Hastings," he said at last. "We will speak to that maid, and then to Miss Pike. I have a small curiosity about candle wax and about keys that walk away in the night." He opened the door, and as we stepped into the corridor, I felt, without being able to name why, that we were leaving the first false path behind. The house had not yet shown us its teeth, but somewhere within it a mind was listening, calculating, and preparing its next move. The drawing room that evening had the air of a theater before the last act, when the audience has settled into a hush too intent for shuffling. A fire burned low. Lamps stood with their shades turned down so that the corners of the room held shadows like listeners. Inspector Harrowby had insisted that everyone be present. Since Monsieur Poirot wants a parlor game, he may have it. But even he, after the day's fruitless searches, seemed grateful for any order that was not his own. They came in one by one. Miss Celia Rotham first, pale but composed, her chin a little lifted as though she had decided to meet calamity standing. Gerald Hart followed, with that hard brightness in his eye that I had seen in men who do not intend to be cornered. Lady Lucinda Merrow entered with the dignity of a queen in exile, her hands folded neatly about her handbag. Deirdre Pike came last, carrying a notebook even now, the sort of reflex that reveals a mind that does not know where else to rest. Jonah Vale lounged near the mantel, outwardly amused, inwardly watchful. Victor Newland stood by the window, turning his hat slowly in his fists. Inspector Harrowby took a seat by the door, notebook ready, jaw set. I sat a little behind Poirot, who had arranged the chairs in a semicircle with fastidious care, so that no one was quite behind another. It struck me that he was arranging not furniture, but faces. Poirot stood before the fire. He looked very small compared to the room, yet it was one of those moments when his smallness seemed to concentrate authority rather than lessen it. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began in that gentle voice which somehow crossed a room better than any shout. "I thank you for your patience. Today has been for you a day of pain, of confusion, of suspicion. For me, it has been a day of observation, And now I will tell you what I have observed." Gerald Hart made an impatient sound. Poirot turned toward him with mildness. "But before we begin, let us be clear. Sir Alistair Rotham did not kill himself." A ripple ran through the group. Celia put a hand to her mouth. Harrowby's head lifted sharply. "You can't say that without—" the inspector began. "I can say it because it is so," Poirot replied, "and I will show you why. You have all been protected by a simple idea, the locked door. The police say a locked room means no one entered, no one left. It is a comforting idea. It is not always true." He walked a step nearer to them, his hands loosely clasped. "Consider the body. If Sir Alistair sat in his armchair and fired a pistol into his own heart, he would fall where he sat. A man with his heart shattered does not rise, walk 2 paces, and arrange himself neatly by the hearth. He drops like a sack. Yet Sir Alistair lay away from the chair, head toward the fire, as if he had been placed there. His right cuff was smeared, not sprayed. It had been wiped by a hand moving him." Deirdre Pike's pencil snapped in her fingers. She looked down at the broken wood as though it were a small betrayal. Poirot went on quietly. "The pistol lay by his hand. Yes. Dropped, you say, but his fingers were not curled around it. In most suicides, the hand contracts, not always, but often enough that we note the absence, and the pistol lay just so, near enough to suggest a drop, far enough to be safe from the dead man's grasp. It was placed." Harrowby's brows knitted, but he did not interrupt again. "Now the chalice. It was taken from the cabinet without force, therefore the key was used. Sir Alistair kept that key close, yet there was no sign of it on him this morning, and the cabinet stood open. So someone else had access to the key, or to a copy. That is the first thread. The second thread. This morning there was a piece of white candle wax by the library door. No candles were burned in the library last night, therefore the wax was not old. It belonged to something done after midnight, done in that room. A little scrap, but my little grey cells, they do not despise the little things." He held up a small envelope. "Inside this is that wax. It has a groove in it, a groove like the rim of a key." Celia stared. Vale's expression sharpened. Lady Lucinda's face remained still, but I saw her fingers tighten on her bag. Poirot did not look at her yet. "You ask, what does wax have to do with a locked room?" "Everything. You see, to lock a door from the outside and yet leave the key on the inside, one must play a trick. A string, perhaps, a wedge, a turn made after one has gone. There are many methods. But on this door there is a narrow gap. A thin cord can pass beneath. A key can be turned from the outside if it is held steady from within. Here is what was done. After the murder, the key to the library door was inserted from inside and left there. A cord was attached to its head. To make the knot hold in the smooth brass, a little softened wax was pressed around it. Then the murderer stepped out, drew the door gently to, placed the cord under the door, and from the corridor pulled the key into the lock and turned it. The wax did its work for a moment, and then, when the cord was pulled free, it left a small broken crescent on the inside floor. He let the silence settle, then added softly, "So the locked door was not a guardian. It was a mask." Victor Newland let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since dawn. Poirot's gaze moved now from face to face. "The third thread, the missing car. Mr. Vale's keys vanished in the night. In the morning his car vanished too." Inspector Harrowby thought, "Aha, the American has fled with the relic. It is a beautiful false lead. It is also a childish one. Mr. Vale did not have his keys, therefore he could not take his car. Someone else took it to make you think he had fled." Vale straightened, eyes flashing. "You're telling me someone stole my car to frame me?" "To distract, monsieur, to clear a path of suspicion away from another." Poirot inclined his head. "Your car was found this afternoon behind the disused lodge at the far end of the estate. Hidden, not driven far. The purpose was never escape. Only illusion. Inspector Harrowby blinked. My men didn't tell me. They told you were busy, Poirot said politely, and Harrowby colored but held his tongue. Poirot turned slightly. Who could take the car? Someone who could move about the house without alarming servants, someone who knew where the keys lay, and someone with a reason to throw dust into the eyes of the police. Gerald. Hart's laugh came out too quickly. This is all very clever, Monsieur Poirot, but where does it put the chalice? On which of us are you about to pin it? Poirot looked at him a heartbeat longer than necessary. We will come to the chalice, monsieur, but first your part in the drama. Hart's smile faltered. My part? Yes. You told us you went to bed at midnight. Yet at 6, when the maid saw Monsieur Newland on the terrace, there were no muddy marks on his shoes. The terrace was wet, and there was a small scuff on the terrace step, made by a man's heel in a hurry, not by a man pacing slowly. That scuff was made in the night, not at dawn. You, Monsieur Hart, left your room after midnight. You went to the hall table. You took Mr. Vale's keys. You took his car and hid it. Why? Because you were asked to. Because you were frightened of someone, or because you owed someone. Which is it? Gerald Hart sprang half to his feet. That's insane. You can't prove a thing. Sit down, Harrowby barked before Poirot could answer. Hart sat, breathing hard, eyes bright with anger and something else. Panic, perhaps. Poirot nodded once as though a small hinge had clicked. The glove button by the hearth was another little thing, he went on. It broke during a struggle. The button is not from a servant's dress or a man's cuff. It is from a woman's kid glove of excellent quality, old-fashioned in its fastening. Only one person here wears such gloves. At last he looked directly at Lady Lucinda Merrow. Her mouth curved faintly. Many women wear gloves, Monsieur Poirot. Not like yours, madame. You wore them at dinner. You wore them in the library when Sir Alister displayed the chalice, and you were the only one to keep them on indoors, because you wished not to leave fingerprints on a glass cabinet. Celia's head jerked toward her. Lady Lucinda. Lady Lucinda did not move. If anything, the composure in her face deepened, as though she had prepared for this moment long ago and was relieved to have it arrive. Poirot's voice softened, not with mercy, but with that curious, clear pity he sometimes permits himself for the human heart. Madame, you have been at Ashley Court, not as a guest only. You were a claimant. Sir Alister said the chalice had many claimants. You are one of them. Many years ago in Belgium, there was an affair of river barges. Smugglers moved relics after the war, yes? One barge was intercepted. A young Sir Alister Rotham was there. A young Lady Lucinda. Then Lucinda O'Rourke was there too. The relic they fought over was the chalice of St. Audran. Sir Alister took it from the chain of custody. He bought silence. He built his reputation on that brilliant theft and called it collecting. But to you it was sacrilege. Worse, it was the ruin of your brother, the monk who tried to bring it home and died branded a thief. You waited. You married. You became a lady. But you did not forget. Lady Lucinda's lips parted a little. For the first time, the mask slipped, and I saw the rawness beneath. You can't know that, she whispered. I know because Sir Alister wrote to me this morning before he died, Poirot said gently. He said the past had come knocking. He said a face from Belgium sat at his table. He was afraid. Not of Newland, of you. Victor Newland swayed slightly. Then, you knew her already? Poirot inclined his head. In another life, yes. Lady Lucinda's voice was thin. You're forgetting Deirdre Pike. She's Irish. She wanted it too. Poirot nodded. Ah, Mademoiselle Pike. Yes, she wanted it returned to the Foundation, to the church, perhaps even to St. Audran's own people. She copied the cabinet key weeks ago when she catalogued the lock. She told you where Sir Alister kept it. She wrote the paperwork that would have moved it away quietly. But she did not murder. Her guilt is of loyalty, not blood. Deirdre Pike went very white, but her eyes met Poirot's squarely. "I never meant—" "I know," Poirot said simply. "You wished to right a wrong through proper channels. Madame Moreau did not wish proper channels. She wished justice of her own making." He turned back to Lady Lucinda. "You went to the library after midnight. You took the copied key from your bag. Sir Alistair was alone, perhaps dozing in his chair. You confronted him. There was a struggle. Your glove button broke by the hearth. You shot him at close range. Then you called Monsieur Hart, who is in debt, frightened of scandal, perhaps eager to protect Celia from disgrace. You told him to remove Mr. Vale's keys and hide the car to send the police chasing the American. He did it. He is not a murderer, only a coward." Gerald Hart made a strangled sound, but said nothing. Poirot's voice fell like a final card on the table. "And you, madame, took the chalice. Not for money. For restitution, you hid it where you always intended to take it next, in the small leather reliquary case in your room, the one lined in green felt. The case you carried when you arrived." Lady Lucinda's hand tightened convulsively on her handbag. Slowly, very slowly, she set it down beside her chair. For a moment, nobody moved. The fire hissed softly. Then Lady Lucinda lifted her head. There was no pleading in her face now, only a terrible, exhausted pride. "Yes," she said. "I took it. I killed him." She looked at Celia, and something in her eyes softened. "Not for you, child. You were kind to him, but he would never give it up. He laughed at my brother's grave. He called it spoils." Celia's cheeks were wet. "You could have told me. We could have." "No," Lady Lucinda said very quietly. "You would have tried to forgive him. There are things that must not be forgiven." Inspector Harrowby rose at last, as if his joints had been waiting for permission. "Lady Lucinda Merrow, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Alistair Rotham and theft of the chalice of St. Odoran." She held out her hands without resistance. As the constable moved forward, she looked once more at Poirot. "You were right, Monsieur Poirot," she said faintly. "Revelations are like soufflé, but they fall just the same." Poirot bowed his head. "Not always, madame. Sometimes they rise. Too late." When they had taken her out, the room remained stunned, as a room does after lightning is struck nearby. Gerald Hart sat with his face in his hands. Newland stared at the floor as though he had seen it split. Deirdre Pike's eyes were closed, her mouth tight with pain. Vale exhaled a low whistle, and then, catching Celia's look, stopped and looked ashamed. Poirot crossed to Celia and spoke gently. "Mademoiselle, you have lost your uncle and your illusion in one day, but you have not lost your honor. Remember that." She nodded, unable to speak. Later, when the house had quieted into that drained stillness that follows tragedy, I walked with Poirot onto the terrace. The gravel lay dark and clean now beneath the stars. Somewhere far off, a car started and dwindled away along the wet road. Poirot drew his coat tighter and looked out at the disciplined hedges, the cold November lawn, the house that had tried so hard to keep its secrets locked behind good stone. "It is a curious thing, Hastings," he said softly, "how people speak of relics as if they were objects. But the true relics are inside us. A grief kept 50 years. A wrong kept warm like a coal. Madame Moreau did not come to steal a cup. She came to reclaim her dead. And yet she killed," I said. "Yes," he sighed. "Justice without law becomes vengeance, and vengeance, it is always untidy. Even when done by a lady with perfect gloves." He turned to go in, then paused, his mustaches lifting minutely. "Still," he added, "Sir Alistair was right about one thing. The past does come knocking. It is wise to open the door with care.